Hello, my name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss critical questions about how the system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at the Fortune S-O-C. Today, the topic that we're going to be discussing is really important. We're talking about what does the inauguration of President Biden mean for criminal legal reform? When we talk about equity, equality, and justice, these ideas form the American creed. We have never lived up to it, however, but we've never stopped trying. This is especially true when it comes to our criminal justice system. Today, many people are incarcerated in the United States, and too many of them are Black and brown. To build safe and healthy communities, we need to rethink who we're sending to jail, how we treat those in jail, and how we help them to get the healthcare, education, jobs, and housing they need to be successful and rejoin society after they serve their time. So recently elected President Joe Biden aims to strengthen America's commitment to justice and to reform our criminal justice system. This is something many will be waiting to see. And so coming off of a presidential campaign, we know that the president had revived the support of Black voters in a year marked by national protests against racial injustice and police brutality. And President Biden is expected to address systemic racism and discrimination that persists in the criminal justice system. But funding goals aimed at reform will be a real uphill battle for Biden's administration. His campaign platform had proposed a $20 billion grant to incentivize states to reduce prison population numbers, as well as provide funding for mental health and substance abuse services. The success of these will depend on congressional support for his agenda. Congress will also determine how the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division can enforce voting rights as Republicans prepare to lead 2021 restricting for a majority of congressional districts. So today, here at Both Sides of the Bars, we'll discuss what does the inauguration of President Joe Biden mean for criminal legal reform. Our guest today is Insha Rahman, Vice President of Policy and Partnerships at the Vera Institute of Justice, an independent nonprofit which takes the causes, or rather tackles the causes and consequences of mass incarceration, racial disparities, and the loss of public trust in law enforcement. Thank you so much for joining us today, Insha, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars.
Thank you for having me, Andre, and I'm so glad to get to talk with you today about this incredibly important and timely topic. We have lots of work to do, and for people to understand and know what the levers of power are in this new administration is key to getting things done.
Absolutely, and obviously, Insha, you're no stranger to Both Sides of the Bars and the work that you've done. A lawyer by profession and trade, been doing this work in marginalized and Black and brown communities ranging from the Bronx and New York City and different areas. So no stranger to this work, deeply passionate and committed to it. And this show, Both Sides of the Bars, and its national impact, we want our viewers to really understand, like when you talk about these levers of power, vis-a-vis like Joe Biden's appointment now to the executive seat in office in the highest seat in this country, we want to talk a little about like what does that mean, Insha, for criminal legal reform? There are proponents who continue to advance ideas through Congress, right, through the Assembly, through the Senate, to make sure that criminal justice reform is a priority. But talk to our viewers, Insha, about what does Joe Biden's presidential inauguration and his appointment mean for criminal legal reform?
And we should talk about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's the first time we've had a vice president in the office who has spent most of her career, if not all of her career, before coming to the Senate, working in the criminal justice and criminal legal system, both in ways that I think people are hopeful for, and also in ways that there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that both the president and vice president are able to deliver on these promises of racial justice, as well as right-sizing the criminal justice system and its impact in Black and Brown Americans' lives. So when we talk about the administration and what can they do, there's essentially three levers of power. And the first one is that the administration and the federal government has vast influence and control over parts of the criminal legal system, as well as the immigration system. People often forget to think about how much immigration drives some of our criminal justice growth and the number of people behind bars. And so, first of all, there's the Bureau of Prisons. There's any number of other government agencies that the president and the vice president have close to complete power over appointments, who leads those agencies, the agenda of those agencies. So with the right person leading the Bureau of Prisons, we can see the end to solitary confinement, a practice that we all know is barbaric and harms more than it delivers safety or any kind of benefit to people who are incarcerated. The administration can also end contracts with jails who are housing people for immigration custody, where people are dying or getting sick of COVID. There's just any number of things that the government can do literally in the administration that is under its control. Second, there is executive order. And by executive order, the president and vice president of the administration can push for policies across the country that actually sort of set precedent. We see President Biden saying, I'm going to use my executive authority to issue a national mask mandate, for example, right? And it's those kinds of taking action and sort of authority that can influence the tenor of criminal legal reform, not only in the federal government, but across the states as well. Because we know that over 90% of the criminal legal system as it operates, as we know it, happens at the state and local level. And then the third way is through the bully pulpit, right, of exhorting states and localities to follow by example, and also to put money, appropriations towards incentivizing, for example, you mentioned the billions that the government has committed to rolling back the criminal legal system and getting people out of jails and prisons. So you can do that through bail reform. You can do that through creating alternatives to incarceration, to investing in housing and treatment, so that we're not using jails and prisons as the first and last resort to all of the ills that we see. I'll say one more really important issue is policing. We know that coming off of this last year, we are really reckoning with the role of police in this country. And the federal government right now, the administration, has a tremendous opportunity to say, we heard you, we heard your calls, we see the urgency and we're responding to it. And we hope that the administration takes action. And by taking action, that's not more talk and more commissions, but it's actually doing really basic things, such as right-sizing the use of money, federal money that goes to law enforcement, to actually put that into communities for violence interruption, for dealing with some of the systemic issues that lead to crime and violence in communities. Likewise, it is making sure that there are standards and oversight and accountability for police who break the law, who violate people's constitutional rights. So policing is a huge, huge issue that, of all of the issues, this administration has been called upon to act first and act immediately, and we really hope they do.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting that, you raise these points. We have precedent set in the history of this country that a woman of color now assumes as the second in command of this entire country. And interestingly enough, Vice President Kamala Harris has this background in law, right? And practicing prosecutor, and obviously received national attention in some of the decisions she's made in the past. Yet obviously she's now more in the way of looking at some of these issues. How important is that? That vice president, especially a vice president who is a woman of color and who has understood some of the issues, but may have made some decisions in the past that wasn't favorable. How is that important for criminal legal reform in this day and time?
It's important because there is no ability for the vice president, or the president for that matter, who has played a huge role in the expansion of the criminal legal system in this country. He was the main author of the 1994 crime bill, and he's apologized for the impact that it has had on Black and Brown communities and the growth of jails and prisons. So it's not just the vice president, but also the president, who has a lot to be accountable for. And what I think is so powerful about having a vice president who comes from having been a practicing prosecutor, run one of the largest DA's offices in the country in San Francisco, and then was the attorney general of the state of California, is if she and the administration doesn't act, or if they act in ways that don't deliver, then we know it's not because they didn't know better, but it's because they choose not to. And so that's actually a level of reckoning and accountability that I don't think we've seen before, because we've often heard, well, we did as much as we can, or we didn't know. There is no saying we didn't know or we didn't do enough, because we know what the needs are. It's apparently clear. It's the mandate upon which this administration was voted into power. And so again, the challenge is, will they deliver, and will they be able to wrangle a Congress that works with them? And they have the power to. It's really, will they take the call to action and heed it?
Absolutely. And, you referenced that that President Biden had endorsed and supported the 1994 crime bill, and he received brickbats because of that, right? And so, like, him thinking about how does he make good on his promise, because it's one thing to apologize, we know, and so it's another thing to be in action, like we're doing it. How can it be some ways that the current administration can begin to move some of those actions forward progressively? And I say progressively, mean real, like, change. Do you think that his administration should make sure that his decisions are informed by directly impacted people and other stakeholders that are on the receiving line, in the receiving end negatively of the criminal legal reform system's impact on them?
Indeed. And if we were to listen to people who are currently behind bars and families of loved ones in jails and prisons and detention centers, what we'd hear is that we have to reckon with COVID behind bars. And, COVID-19, and we are still in the throes of this crisis, almost 11 months in, and our worlds have been turned upside down. And where else has been turned upside down? The world of people behind bars, where as much as this pandemic is harming us, we live afraid. We live in a way that is isolated, that we have to keep distance from each other in order to keep ourselves alive. Well, all of those best practices of social distancing, they are impossible behind bars. And so this administration, one of the most clear signals that they are acting and that they are responding to the demands of people who are directly impacted and incarcerated right now and their families, is to first and foremost take serious action to reduce the number of people behind bars. It is the only way that we are going to combat COVID-19 behind bars, where there have been well over 200,000 people who have been infected and tested positive for COVID-19, and then close to 3,000 deaths just behind bars of the 2.2 million people incarcerated. And we've seen reports that upwards of 16% of COVID-19 cases that happened in Chicago were a direct result of the outbreak in the Cook County Jail. So that's the first step that this administration can take to show that they are serious and that they are listening. The second is for those who remain incarcerated to actually prioritize vaccination and put all jails and prisons and people incarcerated and staff who work there who opt to take the vaccine, put them in the first tier of priority, because again, we will not solve this crisis without actually prioritizing vaccination and inoculation for the most vulnerable among us, who are people behind bars.
Absolutely, Insha. And, it's a really huge and hot button issue right now, the idea of COVID-19 and people that remain behind the prison gates and walls having access to the very things that you mentioned: vaccinations, proper testing, proper PPEs, all of which are really, really important. But then the question is, Insha, how do you organize the distribution of those things? And some maintain and argue that, by saying that people behind bars should be prioritized for the COVID vaccination, it's almost like mandating it, right? And so some people may not be into that. So some people are often referring to the term at least prioritizing access to it, so people have a choice. Do you think there's a way in which that maybe a group of folk can organize, right, from the medical profession, from those who are impacted, and those who are formerly incarcerated, maybe to talk about and direct how things are distributed within the prisons, right? Because it's nuanced, right? And should just not like everyone gets a vaccine. Like there has to be like a process. What are your thoughts on that? And I know it's no easy answer, but just your thoughts.
It's a great and important point, Andre, and I want it to be very clear. It's about offering the vaccine to those who want it. We know that we cannot and should not force people, and there is, for lots of good reasons, especially in communities of color in this country, some skepticism and doubts about things like vaccines, especially one that has come about so quickly. That is real. And so there is a mechanism that this administration has put together. They have immediately assembled a COVID-19 task force that is chaired by a well-known and highly regarded public health expert, Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith, who comes from having studied infections and disease, especially in Black and Brown communities. And so it's working with this task force and making sure that the voices of people who are directly impacted, of their family members, of other public health experts who work at the local level, are involved in a plan. The other thing that this administration can do, though, they have close contact with governors who are responsible for the COVID outreach plans, both in terms of education about the vaccination and as well as setting up the mechanisms for, sequencing who is getting inoculated and when. It's really, we need everybody to rise to the occasion, and governors play an incredibly important role. They have since the beginning of the pandemic in managing COVID-19. We've seen some do more than others to respond to the crisis of COVID-19 behind bars. And we need governors across the board to step up. And again, the bully pulpit is a really powerful force that this administration has, and they need to use it to prioritize COVID-19 and actually, winning the war against this virus, because otherwise we will not be able to move forward and heal as a country.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about like Black and Brown communities' fear of, taking, obviously receiving different inoculations, et cetera. I think about Harriet, I forget Harriet's last name, Harriet Washington's book, Medical Apartheid. And she talks about that at length. And so there's history there. But I also think, again, having people have the opportunity to make a choice, I also think is important, to your point. So, you've talked about these things, right, with the administration, both the president and obviously Vice President, Madam Kamala Harris. And we talk a little bit about police reform. Right now, police reform is one of the hot button issues. People want to push it. A lot of administration hasn't been responsive to it. I was just looking at a documentary the other night. It's called like the Chicago 7 or something like that, and how Mayor Dinkins, when he became the mayor of New York City, how just like a tremendous amount of racism around him being the mayor and what that looked like. What about the culture of policing, right? What are your thoughts on what this administration should do to address that? Because racism is inherent, at least many maintain, within the very culture itself.
Indeed. I mean, we can't do police reform. That is tinkering around the edges. As many people know and has come to light, last year after watching the murder of George Floyd and many, many other instances of police violence and oppression against especially Black and Brown people in this country, the legacy of policing and its roots are based in slavery. The first police patrols were, in fact, patrols to catch, liberated people to enslave them again. And that's the history, that's the culture that policing comes from. And we cannot deny it. As uncomfortable as it is in this country to name that, we have to in order to get at the issue. And so this is really about a transformation of policing itself. And the very first thing that we have to do, and this, again, the bully pulpit is important, is set precedent from the top to right size what we ask the police to do in the first place. So we spend over $200 billion a year on policing alone. And that is money that, money is not infinite. That's money that is not going to communities, to families, to getting people employed, to education and housing. And the first investment, even though, people often say, well, what does that have to do with public safety? In fact, it has everything to do with public safety. We see this time and time again. The communities that are the most resilient, where people are housed, where people have basic needs met, are the ones that are the safest. And that's got to be our first investment, because it's about transforming policing, which means thinking about public safety in this country in a very, very different way. And so, how can this administration do that? They can put their money where their mouth is. They can actually use their influence to create standards and oversight for local law enforcement. There's 18,000 agencies in this country. Change is going to happen slowly, but it needs to happen. And again, money and influence and power and oversight is what will help drive that change in culture and the actual transformation.
Yeah, and it's just so important for people to understand that. And I think that in as much as there's been tremendous challenge in the last administration, and there's been huge impact with the pandemic, therein lies possibility and opportunity. And what are your thoughts about opportunities, right? The future and the impact on the criminal legal reform work?
We spend a lot of our time talking about sort of the front end of the system, right? Of changing policing, prosecutors, bail reform. Those are all sort of hot issues that have gotten a lot of traction. I would actually say one of the issues that needs to be focused on more to actually get down from 2.2 million people behind bars is, how do we get people who are currently incarcerated, many of whom have been there for decades, and they are not the people they were when they entered jail or prison at 18, 19. They are totally safe to walk among us. How do we make sure that we get people out so that we can truly start to turn back the clock on mass incarceration in this country? And so that requires us to do sentencing reform, to take a look at who's behind bars and release people. It requires us to do better with parole and releasing people, especially folks who are elderly, who are sick, who we know this virus is going to be especially harmful to them. So that's where I see a lot of opportunity to have conversations about criminal legal reform that we have never really been able to have before, because every single time we have talked about sentencing reform or releasing somebody on parole, historically what we have looked at is, well, what was the crime of their conviction? And if it was something that is unpleasant to us, then we say, nope, we will throw you away. And now is the moment, this is the opportunity, is that we can no longer throw people away. Our collective liberation, it depends on each of us. And that's the moment that I think we are in. It's the recognition that we have. It will take all of us to do the work, including to push back against fear-mongering narratives that, you release people and you will have an uptick in crime. We know it's simply not true, right? We need our media, we need people, including our elected officials, our politicians, to do the same and to have the courage of their convictions to say, we throw nobody away, we all move together, and our collective freedom and liberation and sort of wellness as a country, our ability to move forward, depends on this.
You've used the term, right, that's becoming rather popular. And I think it's certainly germane to what we're talking about and important, right? You talked about the idea of transformation, like rather than reform. Reform oftentimes offers this piecemeal kind of approach, right, where there may be some window dressing, but no real substantive change. How does that term transformation apply to this work, like in the future, right? Because again, reforms are sometimes just that.
Yeah.
Talk a little about that, because that term is becoming a lot more popular in our work, transformation.
It is. And I think what it's trying to say is, look, we have to make some incremental change that is reform, because you don't get to transformation without taking steps to get there. But if all we are doing is reforming, making incremental change, and we're not reaching transformation, we are not meeting our goal, we're not succeeding. And so I think the phrase transformation, what it is powerful, it reminds us that we aren't done yet. Our work isn't done yet. We have a larger goal, and transformation is that. And so reform, I feel like it's become a dirty word. I don't see it that way, but if all we do is reform, then yes, we've fallen short.
And so, Insha, you're at the Vera Institute. Vera Institute for Justice does some really great work. What is some of the work that we look to get from Vera in the future?
So one of the important things to remember is it's hard to know how to change a system when you actually don't know what the system is doing. And a lot of what Vera has done, and we've been around for 60 years, is to actually shine a light on the system itself through the numbers, through stories, through working with and our government officials and our access to jails and prisons and prosecutors' offices and the courts. And so if you want to understand just what is the scope of this problem and why do we need transformation, we are a source of, I think, powerful information, not only for our government actors to hold them accountable, but to communities and advocates and organizers who are looking to say, we know that the system as is just, it can, we can't, let it stand as is. So I think research and numbers and information is hugely important, and that's something we provide across the entire criminal legal system. And also we provide the solutions. We, for example, we were part of a coalition of folks who won a tremendous victory of allowing federal Pell Grants to pay for quality college in prison. And it seems sort of basic that we know education helps people earn a better living when they're released. The vast majority of people who go away to prison actually do come home. And it also helps people develop their humanity, their sights of sort of who can I be, because we are constantly evolving. And so a small thing like starting a project, 5 years ago, where we piloted college and prison programs through a pilot grant, and then actually moved for state and federal legislation to pay for college and prison. That's an example of taking reform, small steps, and creating actual transformational change. And that's what we do on any number of fronts with policing, parole reform, bail reform, prosecutors, and the rest.
And it's always a pleasure talking to you, and we can certainly talk all day. And I really wanted to, our time is up, but I wanted to get into, at some point, and maybe we'll have you back, why do people refer to the system as the criminal legal system rather than the criminal justice system? I don't know if you can do that in 5 seconds. It may not, but I don't know.
We need to have our system earn the title of justice. And it is a legal system. There are laws that govern it, but they don't always seem just. And so it's a neutral way to say the criminal legal system, not the justice system. One day, hopefully, we can call it the justice system and mean it.
Absolutely. Insha Rahman, Vice President of Policy and Partnerships at the Vera Institute for Justice. We thank you so much for joining us here at Both Sides of the Bars. And we thank you, viewers, for joining us here at Both Sides of the Bars. You can obviously access the Fortune Society at www.fortunesociety.org. My name is Andre Ward. I'm the host of Both Sides of the Bars, and we will see you soon here on Both Sides of the Bars.